Well, hello again, folks. Today we are looking at chapter 13 of John's Gospel. And the main section of this chapter concerns itself with the moment where Jesus washes his disciples' feet. The opening verse really sets the scene perfectly. We find out when this occasion took place. It's just before Passover. So Jesus' eyes are now well and truly fixed on the cross. He knows what awaits him. He knows what lays before him. His hour had finally now arrived. The hour when he would complete the work he had been sent to do. The hour when the Lamb would finally take away the sins of the world. The hour when he would take upon himself the punishment that brings us peace. The hour when he would leave his disciples and return to be with his Father. The hour of his deepest humiliation, but also the hour of his greatest glorification. And when we're given this quite unusual sentence here, we're a little bit confused by the writer. He says, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. What does this mean? Well, this sentence kind of acts as a title, really, for what is about to come. Jesus' love for his disciples was real, it was considerable, but soon he would be leaving them to be with the Father. So would that mean his love for them would wane? Would it fade away to nothing? Well, absolutely not, says the writer. He would love them right to the very end. And this section beautifully illustrates the extent of his love. This is Jesus, God's own Son, the Messiah, the Savior of the world. He's about to go to the cross. He's about to suffer and die for the sin of the world. He's about to do the most important thing in the history of the world. And afterwards, he's going to be exalted to the highest place of all, where he shall be worshipped forevermore. But he does not let that fill him with pride. Instead, he adopts this posture of humility as he gets down on his hands and his knees and he washes his disciples' feet. So what exactly was the custom here all about? Well, to wash the feet of the guests at a feast was certainly the job of a slave. Remember, this is biblical times, so slavery was a very common thing. A rabbi's disciples were to take care of his need, sure, but even this kind of thing was a job beneath them. Remember, it's not kind of the days of good personal hygiene. People aren't, wearing moisturizer, washing their bodies with glorious shower gel and so on. They're not walking about with their feet in well-cushioned, well aired out Nike trainers and lovely soft cotton socks. They're walking around all day long in Middle Eastern heat with their feet in straggly sandals, treading along dusty, dirty roads. Their feet would be in serious need of a good clean. And dear knows what condition their skin would be in, or their toenails would be in, or anything like that. Disgusting to think about. So, as we say, this was a job really for the people at the very bottom of the working ladder. But here stands the King of all creation, and he takes off his outer coat. He gets a towel around his waist. He fills a basin of water. He gets down on his knees and he starts to clean his disciples' feet one by one, and he dries them using the towel. This is an amazing moment. Jesus' love for his disciples is on full display. His compassion, his sincerity, his gentleness, his willingness to serve. As he gets closer and closer to returning to be with his Father, thus emphasizing his separation from mankind, his love for man grows in intensity. His nearness to God brought him ever closer, in fact, to man in affection. Incredible. And what's amazing is this. Did you notice that the writer tells us about Judas and his betrayal? Why is that point mentioned so early in the story? Well, the point is clear. Jesus knows he's about to be betrayed by one of these very men. Surely he would be bitter. Surely he would be angry. Surely his heart would turn to hatred. But not Jesus. His heart was filled with nothing but love and compassion. What an act this is. What a moment this was. You know, non-Christians may object to our faith, exclaiming things like, why on earth would you believe in a God who died on a cross? Doesn't seem like a very great God, does it? Why on earth would you want to worship a God who gets down and cleans the dirty feet of his own followers? on his hands and knees as if he were a dog. But the truth of the gospel is that there is no greatness like the greatness of service. Jesus was willing to step down for us. He was willing to go to the cross for us. He was willing to lay down his life. He was willing to serve rather than be served for our sake. This is a greatness that maybe doesn't fit in with the ideals of our world, but it reveals the true character of God. This servant-hearted God who loves his people and is willing to go to incredible lengths to rescue. So back in our story then, Peter, of course, it's always Peter. He decides to do something. He can't accept that Jesus, his master, is going to do this lowly work. So he says, no, you're not going to wash my feet. But with one single sentence, Jesus disarms him completely. He explains to Peter that this is important. He explains that this act will bind them together. Without this, he will not have a part with Jesus. So Peter, being Peter, he then flips his switch, completely different. He dives right in with 2 feet. He says, if that's the case, why stop at my feet? Wash all of me, get my hands and my head as well. I'm all in for you, Jesus. You are my everything. And of course, in John's gospel, this story comes right before Jesus predicts Peter's denial of him. Amazing, that juxtaposition there. Jesus is with Peter. He's cleaning his feet. Peter says, I want it all. You're my everything. You're my Lord. And then moments later, we learn he's going to betray Jesus. Jesus, though, calms his enthusiasm in the here and now. He explains that this is merely symbolic. Peter's already clean. That is to say, he is a saint before the Lord. There was one, though, who was not clean, and we see that in what happens next. Judas was moments away from selling Jesus out, moments away from betraying his master, and Jesus predicts that very betrayal shortly here. And rather poignantly then, as I say, he also predicts Peter's denial. But it's much more hopeful for Peter. There's a huge difference here between he and Judas. They are held up beside one another in this story, but there's an important distinction between them. So yes, both men let Jesus down. Yes, both men are guilty of sin. Yes, both men choose themselves above Jesus. But the key difference between the two is that Judas is one who does not recognize Christ. Just like we always seem to mention in these chapters, we look back at John chapter 1, where the writer talks about there being a group of people who recognize Christ and a different group who do not recognize him. Well, Judas is in that second group. He doesn't recognize Christ. He's not living for Jesus in any way. He's not just making a mistake as he betrays Jesus. Rather, he's in slavery to sin. His heart does not belong with Christ, but belongs in fact to the devil. Peter, on the other hand, is a completely different story. He is living for Jesus as much as he is able. He's in a different group to Judas. He does recognize Jesus for who he is. And he's about to make one mistake. Yes, it is a terrible one. And that is the nature of our sin. Sin that we all wrestle with in our lives until the very day we die. But Peter's heart belongs to Christ, and so he is forgiven of his sin because he recognizes Jesus. He is one who has accepted that Christ is his Savior and his King, and so he is a child of God. He's been given that right. That's the difference between these two men. Folks, when we sin, even if we deny knowing Christ in order to save ourselves, if our hearts truly do belong to Jesus, then God is faithful to his promises. He forgives us of our sin. He shows us grace and mercy that are limitless, and his love for us will never stop moving toward us. And on that note, we say goodbye to chapter 13. Join us tomorrow, though, as we look ahead into chapter 14. Until then, as ever, God bless.